The air was thick and dark in the slave market on stations 8 and 9. Creatures from all across the galaxy were trapped in metal cages. Some cried, some screamed, and some were just silent. Broken, in the smallest cage, near the edge of the hall, sat a little alien girl. She was small, barely 9 years in her world's age, with glowing silver eyes and soft purple skin. Her white hair was messy, her dress torn, and her back had bruises. She didn't cry anymore. She had cried too much already, and it never helped. Her name was Lyra. She was a princess once. She came from a peaceful planet called Elvarus, where the forests glowed and the skies sang. But her world was attacked by the Iron Fang Empire. Her people were killed, her family taken, and she was captured while hiding under the palace floor. Now she was just another item to sell, another lost child in chains. The slavers called her Item 441. They didn't know she was royal, or maybe they did and didn't care. They only saw her beauty and strange glow, thinking she would bring a high price. But Lyra didn't care anymore. She had stopped hoping for rescue, until the day a human walked into the market. His name was James Mercer. He was a tall man with short dark hair and sharp green eyes. He wore a black jacket, a blaster on his hip, and an old military tag around his neck. He looked like trouble, and he liked it that way. James wasn't there to buy anything. He just needed fuel for his ship, and maybe a drink. But something made him walk through the market first. Call it fate, or maybe guilt. He had seen too much war, too much pain, and sometimes it left him restless. As he walked past the cages, most of the slaves looked away. But then he saw her, Lyra, sitting in the corner of her cage, quiet but watching. Their eyes met, and something strange happened. James felt a chill, a whisper inside his head. Like a voice without words, he stopped. "What is this one?" "He," asked the slaver, pointing to Lyra. "Rare specimen." The slaver grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Found in the ruins of Alvarez, maybe royal, maybe not, who cares? She glows, see? People pay high for pets like that." James looked at the girl again. She didn't beg, she didn't cry, she just stared. Her eyes seemed older than her face, full of pain and fire. James turned away, heart heavy. He couldn't help every lost child in the galaxy. He had done his part in the war, lost too many friends already. But as he walked toward the exit, he heard a small voice in his mind. It wasn't sound, but it was clear. "Help me." James froze. He turned back slowly. The girl was still there, still watching. He felt it again, deep in his bones. This child was not ordinary. And something told him, if he walked away, he would regret it for the rest of his life. "Can she speak?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Nope," the slaver shrugged. "Mute or dumb. Maybe psychic, hard to say." James knew what he had to do. He couldn't just buy her. That would make him no better than them. So he made a plan that night. The lights in the station went out for 10 minutes. Some said it was a power glitch, but others heard explosions near the generator core. While the guards ran around, confused and panicked, James moved. He had memorized the cage locations earlier. He found Lyra's cell, broke the lock with a plasma cutter, and lifted her into his arms. She didn't fight, she didn't cry. She just held on tight, like she had been waiting forever. James carried her through the smoke and chaos. He reached his ship, the Starlight Raven, and locked the doors. By the time the slavers noticed, James was already in hyperspace, inside the ship. Lyra sat quietly on a small bed, wrapped in a blanket. James brought her warm food, water, and a soft pillow. She didn't speak, but she smiled, just a little. It was the first smile he had seen on her face. James sat down across from her, tired and unsure. "What am I doing?" he asked himself. He didn't have a plan. He just knew he couldn't leave her there. The stars outside the window moved fast. Behind them, a powerful enemy would soon be hunting. But inside the ship, for the first time in a long time, there was peace. Lyra looked at James and whispered a word she had never said aloud. "Safe," James nodded. "Yes, kid," he said. Smiling back, "You're safe now." Asterisk, it all started with a scream. but not the loud kind. This one was silent, buried deep in the mind, and only one man heard it. James Mercer didn't believe in magic, or fate, or voices in his head, but that night, something pulled him toward a cage in the darkest part of the slave market, and it changed everything. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know her story or her name. All he knew was this: her eyes were calling him. And for the first time in years, James didn't walk away from a fight. Back on his ship, the Starlight Raven, Lyra sat silently on a metal bench. She looked small under the emergency lights, wrapped in an old jacket James had thrown over her shoulders. He watched her from the pilot's chair, his mind still spinning. "What have I done?" he whispered to himself. He had just stolen a high-value slave from a black market run by the Iron Fang Syndicate. They would hunt him across star systems for this. But when he looked at the girl again, curled up like a fragile creature, he knew he'd do it all over again. Lyra hadn't spoken since they escaped, but she watched James closely, like she was trying to figure out if he was real. He gave her food. She didn't eat at first, then slowly took tiny bites. He offered water. She drank carefully, like it might vanish. James didn't ask questions. Not yet. He knew trauma when he saw it. And this little girl had seen horrors no child should ever witness. After a few hours, Lyra finally moved closer to him. She reached out slowly and touched his jacket sleeve. James turned to her, and she whispered her first word aloud. "Why?" It broke something inside him, not because she asked it, but because of how she asked, like she didn't believe kindness was real anymore. James knelt down to her level. "Because you deserved better," he said. "No one should live in a cage." Lyra blinked, confused on her planet. No human had ever spoken to her with kindness, but this one did not treat her like a pet or a weapon. He treated her like a child. That night, she slept for the first time in weeks. James sat by the door, gun in hand, ready for trouble. And trouble came sooner than expected. The next morning, alarms blared through the ship. Motion detected small craft approaching fast. No ID codes. James swore under his breath. "Slavers," he muttered. "They tagged her somehow." He ran to the med bay, grabbed the scanner, and waved it over Lyra's neck. A faint blinking light appeared near her shoulder. "Under the skin. Tracker," he said. They had implanted a device inside her body, standard slave tech. There was no time for surgery, no time for safety. James opened a small kit, pulled out a blade, and looked into Lyra's eyes. "This will hurt," he said. "But it will make you free." Lyra didn't flinch. She nodded once, her face calm. She had known pain far worse than this. James cut carefully, hands steady despite the shaking engine. Blood flowed. Lyra bit down on cloth, but didn't scream. Within seconds, he pulled out the blinking chip and crushed it under his boot. The ship shook. Enemy fire grazed the hull. James ran back to the controls and punched in random warp coordinates. The ship jumped, stars stretching like strings of light. They escaped for now. Hours passed. James made tea, gave Lyra a warm compress. He looked at her shoulder and said, "You were brave." Lyra finally smiled. Just a little. James felt his chest tighten again. She was more than just a runaway slave, more than a victim. There was something in her, something rare. That night, she drew a picture with an old pen she found in the cockpit. A glowing tree under twin moons, with little figures dancing below. It was her home, Elvarus. Before the war, she showed it to James without saying a word, and he understood. "Don't worry," he said gently. "We'll find what's left of it, or at least make something new." As the Starlight Raven drifted quietly through deep space, James looked at the stars ahead. He didn't know what future waited for them, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone take her again. Not slavers, not warlords, not even fate. And far away, deep in the shadows of a warship, a scarred alien general slammed his fist against a screen. "Find the human," he growled. "Find the girl." Somewhere deep in space, in the cold darkness between stars, something awoke. A warship shaped like a blade drifted through blackness, silent and deadly. Inside, alarms blinked red across the command deck, and in the center stood General Kor, leader of the Iron Fang Syndicate. His voice was cold, cruel, and clear. "The girl is missing," he said. "Find the human who took her, and bring me both alive." Back on the Starlight Raven, James was upgrading the ship's defense system. His hands worked fast, mind sharp. He knew the tracker was gone, but the Syndicate didn't need a chip to find them. They had spies, satellites, informants on every major station, and once they knew his face, they wouldn't stop. Lyra watched quietly from the hallway. She held a small device, a toy James gave her, made from scrap parts. He had called it a puzzle cube. She called it friend. She didn't speak much, but her silence wasn't empty anymore. She listened, learned, and remembered every part of the ship, every sound it made, every strange Earth word James used. She wasn't just healing, she was changing. That evening, James sat at the control panel. Reading data logs, Lyra climbed into the seat beside him, eyes wide with curiosity. He looked at her and smiled. "You want to learn?" She nodded. "All right then," he said. Lesson 1, How Not to Get Caught. James taught her about travel routes, hidden jump points, and how to stay invisible. He showed her how to read maps and track fuel signatures. Lyra watched every move, soaking in every word. But even as they learned and laughed quietly, danger was already close. A bounty hunter named Vex received a signal on the moon of Grayton 5. The human and the girl had passed through a supply dock there. He smelled money, and he liked money more than rules. Back on the ship, James finally let himself rest. He leaned back in the chair and stared out into space. The stars reminded him of old battles, old friends and old regrets. Lyra sat across from him, slowly drawing again. This time, it was a picture of them, James and Lyra, under a fake sun, with the word safe written above. But safety didn't last long. The Starlight Raven landed briefly on a trade station called Nexus Point. James needed parts, food, and information. He told Lyra to stay hidden, but she followed quietly behind, curious and careful. That's when she saw them 3 bounty hunters talking to a slaver captain. One of them held a hollow image of her face, and James's. She rushed back to the ship, faster than her feet had ever moved. James saw her running and knew something was wrong. Without a word, they launched into space. But the hunters were already on their tail. A chase began, wild and fast. The Raven weaved through asteroid fields and solar winds. Lasers flew past their wings, each shot closer than the last. James pushed the ship harder than it had ever flown. Lyra held onto the seat, eyes wide, but not afraid. Inside the chaos, she did something unexpected. She closed her eyes, placed a hand on the control panel, and whispered something in her native tongue. The ship's lights flickered and then steadied. Navigation suddenly locked onto a hidden route, one James didn't even program. They jumped to safety. Breathless James stared at Lyra, amazed. "What did you do?" he asked. She shrugged and gave a soft answer. "Felt the stars." James realized something that moment. Lyra wasn't just a survivor or a runaway. She was something more connected to the universe in a way he couldn't understand. She wasn't just learning from him. She was guiding him too. They landed on a small forest moon to rest and repair. As they sat by a fire under 2 moons, James looked at her and said, "You're different, you know that?" Lyra nodded slowly. "I hear things," she whispered. "In light, in metal, even in you." James didn't know what that meant, but he believed her. Far above, Vex the bounty hunter stared at a broken console. They slipped through. He growled, but he smiled anyway. "Doesn't matter, little girl," he muttered. "I always get my prize." And somewhere deeper in the galaxy, the Syndicate's warlord received a secret report. "She's alive," the voice said. "Her powers are waking up." The warlord turned to a hidden chamber filled with weapons and old scrolls. "Good," he whispered. "Let the hunt begin." It started with light. A soft, golden glow from Lyra's fingers as she touched the wall of the ship. James didn't notice it at first, but the ship did. The engines purred smoother, the lights flickered less, and the system stopped making those annoying clicks. James thought it was just luck. Or maybe the repairs were finally working, but Lyra knew better. She had felt it, that pulse, that connection. Like the ship was listening to her. They were flying through the Yara Belt, a region filled with cosmic dust and drifting ruins. James was searching for someone, an old contact named Zella, who knew things the galaxy tried to bury. He hoped she could explain who Lyra really was, because the girl sitting in his ship was more than just a rescued slave. She was changing. One night, James woke up coughing, the ship filled with smoke. An energy core had overheated. If it exploded, they would both be gone. He ran to shut it down, but it was too late. Then Lyra appeared, calm, glowing faintly. She placed her hand on the core, whispered something in her own language. The smoke cleared, the heat vanished, and the machine went quiet. James stood frozen. What was that? He asked, voice trembling. Lyra looked at him with soft eyes and said, I don't know, but I feel it. The next day, they reached a broken moon orbiting a dead star. There, hidden beneath rock and shadow, was Zella's ship. Zella was old, sharp-eyed, and spoke like every word cost her energy. She stared at Lyra for a long time, then said, She's not just a princess. She's something older. James frowned, confused. What do you mean older? Zella pulled out an old book, made from alien skin and crystal pages. This race, she said, pointing to a glowing symbol. They were once called the Starbound, born with power to speak to machines. Light, even time itself. Your girl might be the last of them. Lyra looked down at her hands, her glow now stronger. I feel everything, she whispered. When the ship cries, when you're scared, even when space moves. James sat down, overwhelmed. He had saved a child, not knowing she could save or destroy entire worlds. He looked at her not with fear, but with something else, respect, and maybe a little awe. That night, bounty hunters tracked their signal again. Zella warned them, offered one last gift, an ancient medallion that could hide Lyra's presence. For a while, you won't have forever, she warned. Sooner or later, the galaxy will feel her. As they left the moon, James turned to Lyra. Do you trust me? He asked. She nodded. Then we train, he said. If you have powers, you need control, and I'm not letting you face what's coming alone. The next few days were filled with strange lessons. James didn't know magic, but he knew focus, survival, and discipline. He taught her how to stay calm under pressure, how to listen before acting. Lyra showed him her side, how she could feel the pulse of energy through wires, how machines obeyed her touch. They became a team, not just pilot and passenger, but protector and rising force. One night, during training, Lyra's powers exploded. A nearby console floated into the air, lights swirling, gravity bending. James held her hand and said softly, Breathe, kid. Don't let the power own you, you own it. Slowly the lights calmed, the console dropped, and Lyra stood still, her eyes glowing silver. I did it, she whispered. James smiled. Yeah, he said, you're getting there. But peace didn't last. Somewhere far away, General Core received a secret message. A new signal, brief but powerful, had lit up one of his scanners. She's alive, he growled. And she's awakening, back on the Starlight Raven. Lyra slept peacefully for the first time in days. James stood watch, gun at his side, eyes on the stars. He didn't know how strong she would become, or what they would face next, but he knew one thing. She was no longer just a lost girl. She was becoming something rare, something powerful, and soon, the galaxy would know her name. The door opened with a whisper. Cold air rushed out from the chamber like the breath of a sleeping monster. James stood at the edge, holding a pulse rifle in one hand and Lyra's hand in the other. They had come too far to turn back now. This was it, the heart of the Iron Fang Syndicate, the place where Lyra had been sold, tagged, and forgotten. But they weren't here to hide this time. They were here to find the truth, and maybe to end something dark. It had started with a signal, a faint voice in an encrypted code, bouncing between dead satellites. Lyra had heard it in her dreams, her mother's voice, calling from somewhere cold and deep. James tracked it to this place, a hidden station buried inside an old mining colony. No map showed it, no traffic came here, but it was alive. Lights flickered inside, and shadows moved. As they entered, the halls were quiet, but not empty. Scars lined the walls, burn marks, bullet holes, signs of old battles. Lyra walked slowly, sensing something more. She touched the metal and closed her eyes. "This place remembers pain," she whispered. James checked corners, aimed down narrow halls. They had 20 minutes before the patrols returned. He had hacked the door codes using stolen data from Zelly's network. It wouldn't keep them safe for long. In the center of the station, they found the prison block, rows of holding cells, some empty, some filled with broken beings who no longer spoke. Lyra stopped at one cell, her breath frozen. Inside was an old alien man, weak and scarred. His eyes widened when he saw her. You're the daughter," he whispered. James opened the cell quickly. "Who are you?" he asked. "I was a royal guard," the man coughed. "I failed her family, but her mother, Queen Nira, she lives." Lyra dropped to her knees, tears in her glowing eyes. "My mother's alive?" "She's not far," the guard said. "They moved her to the vault levels, but it's a trap. They used my voice to pull you here." James cursed under his breath. "We need to move," he said. He lifted the guard onto his shoulder. Lyra led the way, her powers faintly glowing under her skin. They reached the vault's thick doors, heavy locks, guarded by drones. James started hacking, hands shaking. But then Lyra stepped forward. She raised her hand, whispered to the door. The metal shimmered like water, and then slid open. Inside was a long glass chamber, and floating in the center was her, Queen Nira, suspended in stasis, still breathing, still alive. Lyra ran forward, but stopped. An alarm had triggered, red lights flashing everywhere. "It's a trap," James said, raising his weapon. Soldiers poured into the room from all sides, armored and armed. James opened fire, covering Lyra. She knelt beside her mother's chamber, placing both hands on the glass. Her glow turned brighter, brighter than ever before. The energy surged through the room. Machines sparked. Weapons froze in the soldiers' hands. A pulse exploded from her body, soft but powerful. The soldiers dropped to their knees, dazed, confused. James stared in awe. Lyra wasn't just using her powers now. She was becoming them. The chamber broke open, steam rising as Queen Nira slowly opened her eyes. "Lyra?" she whispered weakly. Lyra cried and hugged her tightly. "I found you, Mama." But the moment didn't last. From behind the smoke, a new figure appeared, tall, armored in red and black. "General Kor," he clapped slowly. "Well done, little star," he sneered. "But you've only just begun." James stepped in front of them, gun raised, but Kor didn't attack. "Not yet. I want her alive," he said. "She's the key to everything." Then the walls shook. The guard, who had stayed behind, had planted charges near the power core. A final act of loyalty. "Run!" he shouted from the comms. The blast echoed through the station, giving them a narrow escape path. James carried the queen. Lyra led the way. Fire, alarms, crumbling walls. They barely made it back to the Starlight Raven. They launched just as the station exploded behind them, but Kor survived, and now he was angry on board. Queen Nira lay resting in the medbay. James sat beside Lyra in the cockpit, covered in bruises and dust. "You did it," he said. Lyra looked ahead, eyes glowing brighter than ever. "No," she said, "we just started." But not the safe kind. The silence felt heavy, like space itself was holding its breath. Lyra stood alone in the center of the Starlight Raven. Her eyes closed. The ship floated through deep space with no sound. No alarms, no blinking lights, everything was still, as if the stars were waiting for her to open her eyes. And then she did, and the ship woke up with her. Every screen lit up, systems reactivated, and a quiet hum returned to the walls. James rushed in from the med bay, where Queen Nira was still healing. "What happened?" he asked, breathless. Lyra looked at him calmly. "I saw them," she said. "Every planet, every soldier, every mind trying to find me." James blinked, confused. "Saw? How?" Lyra didn't answer, but the truth was already forming around them. She was evolving. Her powers were no longer just flashes of energy or soft glows. They were growing into something alive, something ancient. James sat beside her. Unsure, he had fought in wars, seen alien tech, faced death. But this was something beyond science or training. It was something he couldn't explain. Later that night, Lyra had a dream. She walked through a field of stars, her bare feet touching nothing. In the distance, a giant figure made of light waited, arms open. It spoke without words. "You are not just one," it said. "You are many." She woke up crying, but not from fear, from understanding. She now knew who she was, not just a princess, not just a child. She was Starburn, a bloodline lost in legend, born to carry the voice of the galaxy. And now that voice was waking up inside her. But with that awakening came pain. James found her trembling near the ship core, her body flickering with bursts of energy, her breath short, her voice shaking. "I can't hold it," she said. "It's too much." James knelt beside her, holding her hand. "You don't have to hold it alone," he said. "I'm right here." Suddenly, alarms screamed. 2 enemy ships had locked onto their signal. General Kor was done waiting. He wanted her now, alive or broken. It didn't matter to him. James ran to the controls, guiding the ship through a narrow asteroid path. Lasers rained from behind, shaking the hull. Lyra stood in the center of the bridge, her glow pulsing with the rhythm of the ship. She raised both hands, eyes glowing white. The engines surged, faster than they'd ever gone before. They disappeared into warp just as a missile passed through their last shadow. When the ship stopped again, they were far from any star, floating in a quiet patch of darkness. James exhaled, forehead sweaty. "That was new," he said. Turning to Lyra, she nodded, still glowing. "I didn't control it," she whispered. "It controlled me." That's when the fear started. What if her powers became too strong, too wild, too dangerous? What if she became what the enemy feared, something unstoppable? Queen Nira, still recovering, called them both into the med bay. She looked at Lyra with eyes full of love and worry. "You carry a light that can heal," she said, "but that same light can destroy." If left alone, James stood near the door, quiet. He had always been the protector, the fighter, the one who made plans, but now, the real battle wasn't one he could fight with a gun. It was inside Lyra. Later, while everyone slept, Lyra walked out onto the viewing deck. She stared at the stars, breathing slowly. And then she heard the voices again, not words, but feelings. Fear, hope, rage, love, from far across the galaxy. She could feel other minds reaching out. Some wanted to destroy her, but some wanted her help. A starburst flared in her eyes, and her body lifted from the ground for a moment. Her hands shimmered with golden energy. She whispered into the dark, "I am awake now." At that same moment, across the galaxy, machines paused. Creatures stirred in sleep, and General Kor fell to his knees, clutching his head. "She's activated," he gasped. "She's fully awakened, back on the ship." James found Lyra floating just above the floor, her light soft and warm. He didn't pull her down. He simply stood there and said, "I'm with you." She opened her eyes and smiled. "I know." In that moment, they both understood. This wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about rising into who she truly was, and preparing for the storm to come. The sky was on fire. Red streaks of plasma and smoke filled the air above the prison planet Varrock 9. James had never seen a battlefield like this, half war zone, half nightmare, and in the center of it all stood Lyra, glowing like a living star. She was no longer hiding, no longer afraid. The little girl from the cage was gone. In her place stood a force of hope and power. Behind her, Queen Nera leaned against a broken wall, weak but watching. To her left, rebels and former prisoners were rising up. To her right, James stood firm, gun ready, eyes on the enemy line, and in front of them, walking through fire and ruin, was General Kor. He looked at Lyra with a twisted smile. "You could have ruled with me," he said. "You have no idea what you are." Lyra's voice was calm, clear, and stronger than ever. "I'm not what you think," she said. "I'm not your weapon." Kor laughed and charged forward. The ground shook beneath his boots. James fired once, twice, but it wasn't enough. Then Lyra raised her hand, and the world stopped moving for a moment. Time itself slowed. Dust hung in the air like frozen snow. Even James couldn't breathe, only Lyra moved. Walking forward with light pouring from her skin, she reached Kor, placed her hand on his chest, and whispered, "This ends now." A soft pulse of energy spread out from her palm. Not fire, not destruction, something gentler, deeper. Kor stumbled back, eyes wide, then collapsed, unconscious but alive. His armor cracked, his power gone. The prisoners began cheering. The rebels shouted her name. "Lyra!" they cried. "Lyra!" But Lyra didn't cheer. She turned to the crowd and raised both hands. "There's more to do," she said. "This is not the end." She helped her mother stand. She held James's hand, and together, they walked to the center of the broken courtyard. There, Lyra sent out one final wave of energy. It spread across the planet, unlocking cell doors, powering medical bays, even healing wounded soldiers who had once fought against her. People across the galaxy felt it, a ripple in their hearts, as if the stars themselves whispered, "Something new has begun." A week later, Lyra stood in the great hall of Elvarus, rebuilt stone by stone. The flags of many worlds hung above. Aliens, humans, and machines all stood side by side. She didn't wear a crown. She wore a simple cloak, and a necklace made from the remains of the tracker they once pulled from her shoulder. A reminder of where she had been and what she had become. Queen Nera watched with pride. James stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, smiling quietly. He didn't like politics or crowds, but he was proud too. After the ceremony, Lyra found him staring at the stars. "You're leaving again, aren't you?" she asked. James nodded. "There are other places that need help," he said. "I'm not the staying type." Lyra hugged him tight. "You'll always have a home here," she whispered. James smiled. "And you'll always be more than a little girl in a cage." He turned, walked toward his ship. The Starlight Raven hummed to life once more, and as he lifted into the sky, he looked down one last time. Lyra stood on the balcony, hands glowing faintly, and behind her, the city of peace she had built with her own light. The galaxy was still broken, still wild, but now it had something it hadn't had in years, a reason to believe, because sometimes the smallest spark can light up the darkest sky, and sometimes the one they tried to break becomes the one who saves them all. Her name was Lyra. She was a princess, a survivor, a starburn, and this was only the beginning.